The cold night air bit at Liam's skin as he stood on the front porch, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. His father's voice still rang in his ears, loud, final, and laced with disappointment. "You're not my son anymore. Get out." The door slammed shut behind him, cutting him off from the only home he had ever known. Liam's hands trembled as he clutched his backpack, stuffed hastily with a few clothes and his phone. His heart pounded in his chest, but the lump in his throat wouldn't let him cry, not yet. He glanced at the darkened windows, half expecting his mother to come running, to say this was all a mistake. But no one came. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He was alone. A gust of wind swept through the empty street, rattling the leaves along the sidewalk. Liam's eyes darted toward his phone. 5% battery left, no missed calls, no messages. His father had meant every word. There was no going back. As he took a shaky step forward, the weight of uncertainty crushed down on him. He had nowhere to go, no plan. But karma had a way of balancing the scales. And Liam was about to find out just how much the world had in store for him. Liam had always known he was different, even before he could put a name to it. Growing up in a conservative household, he learned early on to keep parts of himself hidden. His father, Richard Calloway, was a strict man, ex-military, deeply religious, and someone who believed that discipline was the key to a successful life. His mother, Diane, was softer in nature but submissive, always nodding along with whatever Richard said, never daring to challenge him. Liam had tried for years to be the son his father wanted. He played football even though he hated the roughness of it, sat silently through long sermons at church, and avoided any behavior that might make him stand out. But the older he got, the harder it became to pretend. By the time he turned 18, he had accepted himself for who he was, even if his family never would. Their home was a picture of suburban normalcy, 2 stories, a pristine lawn, and a white picket fence, as if it had been pulled from a magazine. But inside, the air was thick with unspoken expectations. Richard ruled the house like a general, and Diane followed in his shadow. For months, Liam had debated whether to come out, running the conversation over and over in his mind. Maybe, just maybe, his parents would surprise him. Maybe his father's love would outweigh his rigid beliefs. Maybe his mother would stand up for him. But when the moment came, it unraveled faster than he ever imagined. It happened over dinner, a Sunday evening like any other. The kitchen smelled of roasted chicken and mashed potatoes, his mother humming as she set the plates. Liam had barely gotten the words out, "I'm gay." The silence was suffocating. His father's face hardened instantly, his jaw tightening. Diane's fork clattered against her plate, but she didn't say a word. Then Richard spoke. "No son of mine is going to live in sin under my roof." Liam's stomach twisted. "Dad, out." The word cut through him like a blade. His mother's lips parted, as if she wanted to say something, but her eyes darted toward Richard, and she looked away. Liam's hands shook as he pushed back from the table. His father stood, grabbed his coat, and pulled his wallet from his pocket. He threw a crumpled $20 bill onto the table. "Find somewhere else to go." Diane still didn't look at him. And just like that, the world he had always known shattered. Now, as he walked away from the only home he had ever known, the weight of rejection settled on his chest. He had no plan, no safety net. But somewhere, deep inside, a small voice whispered, "This isn't the end. It's just the beginning." Liam's feet ached as he trudged down the empty sidewalk, his breath visible in the cold night air. He had walked for what felt like hours, the $20 bill his father threw at him still crumpled in his pocket. His phone was dead now. No messages, no lifelines. He considered his options. His best friend, Jake, lived across town, but it was late, and Liam hated the idea of showing up unannounced, looking desperate. The thought of explaining why he had nowhere else to go made his stomach twist. Instead, he found himself wandering aimlessly, passing familiar houses that suddenly felt foreign, as if he no longer belonged in the world he had known. The city bus stop up ahead was empty except for a single man sitting on the bench. He was older, maybe in his late 30s, dressed in a worn hoodie and jeans. His face was partially hidden by the shadows, but he seemed lost in thought. As Liam approached, the man looked up, his eyes sharp and assessing. "Rough night?" he asked, his voice steady but not unkind. Liam hesitated before nodding. Something like that. The man studied him for a moment, then motioned to the bench. You're not the first kid I've seen walking around here looking like they got nowhere to go. You hungry? Liam's pride flared, but his empty stomach spoke louder. He nodded. The man reached into his backpack and pulled out a wrapped sandwich, handing it over without another word. Liam took it cautiously, unwrapping the plastic. The first bite tasted like relief. After a long silence, the man spoke again. You got somewhere to be tonight? Liam's grip tightened around the sandwich. He could lie, say he was just out for a walk, but something about the way the man asked made it clear he already knew the answer. No, Liam admitted. Not anymore. The man nodded as if he understood completely. Name's Eric, he said, stretching out a hand. Liam hesitated before shaking it. Liam. Eric leaned back against the bench. You're lucky it's me you ran into and not someone else. Streets aren't kind to kids like you. Liam swallowed. What do you mean, kids like me? Eric gave him a knowing look. The kind who get kicked out for being themselves. Liam felt his throat tighten, but he didn't argue. Eric sighed, rubbing his hands together for warmth. Listen, I've been where you are. I know how this goes. But you don't have to figure this out alone. Liam looked at him warily. Why would you help me? Eric's gaze was steady. Because someone once helped me when I had nowhere to go. And now it's my turn. Liam had no idea that this stranger would change his life forever. But for the first time that night, he felt something close to hope. Liam followed Eric through the dimly lit streets, his stomach still twisting with uncertainty. He barely knew this man, and every warning his mother had ever given him about strangers echoed in his mind. But Eric didn't push him, didn't rush him. He simply walked, occasionally glancing back to make sure Liam was keeping up. Eventually, they arrived at a run-down but well-lit diner tucked between two closed shops. The neon open sign buzzed softly in the night. Eric held the door open, and the warmth inside wrapped around Liam like a comforting embrace. The smell of frying bacon and fresh coffee filled the air, and a waitress with tired eyes glanced up from behind the counter. You're late, she muttered at Eric, but there was no real bite in her voice. Got sidetracked, Eric replied, nodding toward Liam. The waitress's gaze softened as she looked at Liam. You hungry, sweetheart? Liam hesitated, but Eric nudged him toward a booth. Go on. Best grilled cheese in town. The moment Liam sat down, the weight of the night crashed over him. His father's voice still echoed in his head, the cold rejection sitting heavy in his chest. He'd always known this was a possibility, but knowing and experiencing it were two different things. So, Eric said, sliding into the booth across from him. You got a plan? Liam let out a hollow laugh. No. I just left. My dad gave me $20 and told me to figure it out. Eric shook his head, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Yeah. That sounds about right. The waitress returned with 2 plates, setting a steaming grilled cheese in front of Liam along with a bowl of soup. He hadn't realized how hungry he was until he took the first bite. The warmth spread through him, soothing in a way he hadn't expected. Eric watched him for a moment before speaking again. You got anywhere to stay tonight? Liam hesitated, not wanting to admit the truth. Eric sighed. Look, I'm not saying trust me right away. But there's a shelter a few blocks from here. It's run by a guy named Marcus. Good man. He helps kids like you, no strings attached. Liam frowned. Kids like me. Eric met his gaze. Yeah. Gay kids. Trans kids. Ones kicked out just for existing. Liam's throat tightened. He didn't want to be one of those stories, the kid people pitied. But here he was. Eric must have sensed his hesitation. It's not forever, just a place to get your head straight. You can figure out your next move from there. Liam nodded slowly, swallowing down his pride. Okay. The shelter wasn't what he expected. It wasn't a depressing, run-down place filled with lost souls. It was small but clean, with warm lighting and walls covered in artwork, murals painted by the people who had come through. The staff greeted Eric like an old friend, and Liam felt a pang of curiosity. How do you know this place? Liam asked as they checked in. Eric gave him a small smile. Because I used to be you. Liam didn't ask for details, but something about the way Eric said it made him feel less alone. The next few weeks were the hardest of his life. The shelter provided safety, but it didn't erase the pain of what had happened. Nights were the worst, lying awake in a room full of strangers, staring at the ceiling, wondering if his mother thought about him, if she missed him. During the day, he forced himself to move forward. He met Marcus, the shelter director, who was firm but kind. Marcus believed in work over pity, and within days, Liam had a list of small goals to work toward: getting an ID, finding a part-time job, and, eventually, a place of his own. Finding a job was a challenge. Every application felt like a reminder of how unprepared he was for the real world. Most places wanted experience he didn't have, and every rejection stung. But he kept trying. One afternoon, after another fruitless job hunt, he found himself back at the diner. The same waitress from his first night, Maria, noticed him sulking over a cup of coffee. "Tough day?" she asked. Liam sighed. "Yeah. No one wants to hire some homeless kid with no experience." Maria tapped her chin. "You ever worked a register before?" Liam blinked. "No." She shrugged. "Well, I need someone to help out during the morning rush. You seem like a smart kid. Want to learn?" His heart pounded. "Are you serious?" Maria smirked. "Dead serious. But no slacking. I run a tight ship." It wasn't glamorous, but it was something. Liam threw himself into the work, learning how to take orders, handle the coffee machine, and deal with cranky customers. He made mistakes, but Maria never yelled, just corrected him and moved on. The first time he got a paycheck, he stared at the paper in disbelief. It wasn't much, but it was his. The small victories started adding up. He saved what he could, found a tiny room to rent with another shelter kid, and slowly built a routine. The pain of his father's rejection was still there, but it didn't define him anymore. One day, as he wiped down tables at the diner, his phone buzzed with an unknown number. Hesitating, he answered. "Liam." His mother's voice was barely above a whisper. His heart stopped. He hadn't heard from her since that night. "Liam, honey, she hesitated. "I miss you." Liam gripped the phone tighter. "Then why didn't you stop him?" Silence. Then, a quiet, broken, "I was scared." He wanted to be angry. He wanted to scream at her for staying silent. But instead, he just sighed. "So was I." Another pause. "Can we talk?" Liam exhaled slowly. "Maybe. Maybe not today. But someday." "Yeah," he said. "We can talk." As he hung up, Eric slid into the booth across from him. "You okay?" Liam nodded, staring out the window. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, he knew he could face it. "Karma works in funny ways," Eric said with a smirk. "Told you things would change." Liam chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah, you did." The day Liam saw his father again was one he never expected. It had been nearly a year since the night he was thrown out. In that time, he had built something resembling a life. He had his job at the diner, a tiny but stable apartment he shared with his roommate Jesse, and a small circle of people who had become his found family. He wasn't healed. Some nights he still woke up expecting to hear his father's voice calling him downstairs for breakfast, but he was stronger. Then, one afternoon, the bell above the diner door jingled, and Liam glanced up from behind the counter. His heart stopped. Richard Calloway stood just inside the entrance, looking older, more tired than Liam remembered. The usual ironclad posture was gone, replaced by slumped shoulders and wary eyes. He hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward. Liam's hands tightened around the coffee pot he had been refilling. Every instinct in his body told him to turn away, to pretend he didn't see him. But instead, he met his father's gaze, his voice steadier than he felt. "What are you doing here?" Richard shifted uncomfortably, glancing around as if unsure how to proceed. He cleared his throat. "I was in the area." Liam crossed his arms. "And?" His father hesitated again, then exhaled. "And I wanted to see you." Liam let out a sharp laugh, unable to help himself. "You wanted to see me? Where was that when I was standing outside our house with nowhere to go?" Richard flinched. For a moment, Liam saw something flicker in his expression, regret, maybe even shame, but he didn't let himself believe it too easily. I made a mistake, Richard admitted. A big one. Liam felt something inside him crack, but he held his ground. You didn't just make a mistake. You threw me away like I was nothing. Richard exhaled slowly, his fingers tapping against the countertop. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought, he stopped, his voice breaking slightly. I thought if I pushed you away, you'd change. That maybe it was just a phase. Liam's stomach twisted. The words still stung, but they didn't have the power over him they once had. He had spent too many nights wondering what he could have done differently, but now, standing here, he saw the truth. It was never about him. It was about his father's fear. I didn't change, Liam said quietly. I just learned to live without you. Richard swallowed hard. I know. His voice was thick now, raw in a way Liam had never heard before. And I hate that. I hate that I let you go so easily. Liam looked at him, really looked at him. His father wasn't the immovable, towering figure he had once been. He was just a man. A flawed, broken man who had finally realized what he had lost. For so long, Liam had imagined this moment. He had imagined screaming at his father, telling him he never wanted to see him again. He had imagined walking away, just like his father had done to him. But now, standing in front of him, Liam felt none of that. He just felt tired. I don't know if I can forgive you, Liam admitted, his voice quiet but firm. Not yet. His father nodded, looking down at his hands. I understand. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket, pulling out a folded piece of paper. Your mother wanted me to give you this. Liam hesitated before taking it. The envelope was worn, as if it had been handled too many times. Richard took a step back. I won't push. But if you ever want to talk, I'll be here. Then, just as suddenly as he had come, he turned and left. Liam stood frozen, staring at the envelope. His hands shook as he carefully opened it, revealing his mother's familiar handwriting. My sweet boy, not a day has gone by that I haven't missed you. I should have fought harder for you. I'm sorry. If you're willing, I'd love to see you. Love, Mom. Liam exhaled shakily, gripping the letter as emotions swirled inside him. Karma had a funny way of working things out. Maybe this wasn't the ending he had imagined. Maybe it was a new beginning. Liam sat on the worn-out couch in his apartment, staring at the letter from his mother. His hands traced the edges of the paper, his mind racing with memories of the home he had once known, the warmth of his mother's hugs, the scent of fresh-baked bread on Sundays, the quiet moments when she would run her fingers through his hair as he sat at the kitchen table doing homework. But those memories were tainted now, clouded by the night he had been cast out. He reread her words, looking for something deeper, something that would tell him whether she truly regretted her silence, or if this was just another attempt to smooth over the damage that had already been done. 4 hours, he debated whether to call. His heart waged a war between longing and self-preservation. He wanted to hear her voice. He wanted to know that she meant what she said. But he also knew that opening that door again meant risking more pain. Eric found him sitting in the same spot when he returned from his shift at the community center. Without a word, he sat next to Liam, glancing at the letter. You gonna call her? Liam exhaled, rubbing his temples. I don't know. Eric leaned back, resting his arm along the back of the couch. I get it. When my parents reached out after kicking me out, I ignored them for years. I thought that if I let them back in, I'd just get hurt all over again. Liam turned his head slightly. Did you ever talk to them? Eric hesitated. Yeah. Eventually. It wasn't easy. But I realized something. You don't forgive for them. You do it for yourself. You let go so you can move forward. Liam nodded, absorbing Eric's words. He had spent so much time carrying his anger like a shield, afraid that if he put it down, he'd be left defenseless. But what if holding onto it was only hurting him? A few days later, he made the call. His mother answered on the first ring, her voice shaky. Liam. He swallowed hard. Yeah, it's me. A small sob escaped her, followed by a moment of silence. I wasn't sure if you'd call. I almost didn't. I'm so sorry, sweetheart, she whispered. I should have spoken up that night. I should have fought for you. Liam clenched his jaw, his emotions warring inside him. Then why didn't you? She inhaled sharply. Because I was scared. I was scared of your father, of losing our family, of everything changing. Liam's fingers tightened around the phone. Everything did change. I lost my family anyway. I know, she admitted. And I've regretted it every day since. Silence stretched between them, heavy with all the things they hadn't said. Then she spoke again, her voice steadier. I left him, Liam. Liam's breath caught. What? I couldn't stay with a man who chose hate over his own son. It took me too long to see it, but I see it now. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I want a chance to make things right. If you'll let me. Liam closed his eyes, his heart pounding. He wasn't sure what he had expected, but it wasn't this. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to hope. I don't know if I'm ready, he admitted. That's okay, she said softly. I'll wait. In the weeks that followed, Liam started taking slow steps toward rebuilding his relationship with his mother. Their conversations were awkward at first, filled with unspoken apologies and careful words, but little by little, the walls between them began to crumble. His father never reached out, and Liam knew he never would. But strangely, that no longer felt like a wound, it was just a fact. Some people never changed. But he had. Liam's life wasn't perfect, but it was his. He continued working at the diner, saving up for school, and volunteering at the shelter that had once been his refuge. He helped kids who had been through what he had, sharing his story in the hopes that it might make their journey a little easier. One evening, as he wiped down tables, Maria, the diner's owner, slid an envelope onto the counter. What's this? Liam asked, confused. Open it, she said with a small smile. He hesitated before tearing it open. Inside was a letter from a local art school, one he had applied to months ago but never let himself dream about. His hands shook as he read the words. Congratulations! We are pleased to offer you admission for the upcoming semester. His breath hitched. I got in, he whispered. Maria grinned. Damn right you did. Liam laughed, shaking his head in disbelief. He had spent so long fighting to survive, he had almost forgotten what it felt like to dream. That night, he met Eric at their usual spot, the same diner booth where their paths had first crossed. So, Eric said, sipping his coffee. What's next? Liam smiled, a real, full smile. Everything. For the first time in his life, Liam wasn't running from his past. He was running toward his future. And nothing, not his father's rejection, not the hardships he had faced, was going to hold him back. 10 years later, Liam stood at the front of a packed auditorium, looking out at the sea of faces before him. The room was filled with students, families, and members of the LGBTQ+ community, all gathered for the annual fundraiser benefiting homeless youth. As he adjusted the microphone, he took a deep breath, steadying himself. If you had told me 10 years ago that I'd be standing here today, I wouldn't have believed you, he began. Back then, I thought losing my family meant losing everything. I thought being kicked out was the end of my story. But I was wrong. He glanced toward the front row, where Eric sat with a proud smirk. Maria gave him an encouraging nod, and his mother, now his biggest supporter, wiped away a tear. The truth is, being rejected by one family led me to another. A family I built through love, kindness, and resilience. A family that chose me, just as I chose them. The crowd fell silent, hanging on to every word. I know there are people in this room tonight who feel lost, who feel like they don't belong. But I promise you this, you are not alone. There is a place for you in this world, and there are people who will love you exactly as you are. As the audience erupted into applause, Liam smiled, knowing that his journey, once defined by pain, was now a beacon of hope for others. He had turned his struggle into purpose, proving that even the darkest nights could lead to the brightest dawns.